Okay. So folks, good morning everyone. You are all very, very welcome here to Cavan Park, which, as most of you are aware, is the gateway for our global geopark in West Cavan, and no better of a fitting location, I think, to launch today our global geopark digital poetry map, because nowhere else can you see that embodiment of how people have engaged with the landscapes anywhere better than here in Cavan Park. I think most of you in the room know me. I've been around the geopark now for quite some time, but my name is Martina O'Neill and I am the Countryside Management Officer with Cuilcagh Lakelands UNESCO Global Geopark. My role at the present moment in time is to look after site management and maintenance, and also to engage with communities and people around projects that are focused on sustainable recreation and conservation as well. But in a former life, had the pleasure of working with Bea, our poetry map curator, to bring to you today the digital poetry map. So as I say, the purpose of today is really to launch that UNESCO Global Geopark digital poetry map, which, as we say, is the brainchild of our geopark guide, Bea Smith, and has been very kindly funded and supported by our colleagues in the Geological Survey of Ireland through their GeoHeritage Fund. Today is a day of celebration, folks. This is the culmination, would you believe it now, of almost 15 months of work, and we are absolutely delighted to be here to share the results of the poetry map with you all today in what is fittingly UNESCO World Poetry Day. We're delighted that so many of you could actually be here today who have been involved in the project and so gracious and given your time and your energy and support to it. And as I say, a very warm welcome to you. But we're aware that there are a number of people who regrettably, for a number of reasons, haven't been able to make it here today. You've all been given a wee copy of the running order and the itinerary for the day, so we will be following that as we go through. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce you all please to the present Geopark Manager, to Gráinne O'Connor, who has kindly agreed to say a few words.
Hi everybody, it's lovely to be here today, back in Cavan Park, where I've spent so many years walking about here. So it's really nice to be here and see you all today. I'm not going to keep you long, but I just wanted to say a few words, I suppose, in a wider geopark context about how important projects like this are for the geopark. A lot of the time we focus, or there is a perception that projects around the geopark are focused on tourism and, economic development. But things like this intangible heritage project that we have in our poetry map is really valid for the geopark, because geoparks, a lot of the ethos of the geopark is the community approach and working with communities and working with local artists and really, I suppose, interpreting the landscape, and no better way of interpreting the landscape than through poetry. And I think Bea has been really a leader for us in that regard, in terms of being a geopark guide and leading that process for us. So we really are grateful. I suppose it's wonderful to have our chair of the Geopark Committee here, Councillor John Paul Feely. You're very welcome here today as well. I know he's a real ambassador for our geopark. He's chair of our committee and really tries really diligently to, I suppose, push forward all the ideas that we have. It's been a really busy couple of years for the geopark because we've had a huge amount of change. During COVID times, it's been quite difficult in terms of not having all the staff together in the office, because we have a lot of new staff and we have restructured. So you will be aware at this stage we changed our name a number of months back from Marble Arch Caves UNESCO Global Geopark to Cuilcagh Lakelands Geopark. So that again was a process that came about through strong community consultation and consultation with our stakeholders. And we're really delighted that this name kind of represents in a more holistic manner the communities that we work with. So projects like this, the Geopark Poetry Map, are integral to that. And projects like this don't happen unless you have really good people working on them. And in that regard, I'd really like to compliment Bea as our Geopark guide and a real driver of this project in doing so, and all the people involved in it. I particularly like to say well done to Martina as well, who really from the very beginning has been driving this project as a really important aspect for the geopark. So thank you, Martina. Also, in terms of our funders, Claire Gandald is there from Geological Survey of Ireland. As I said, projects like this don't happen unless we work with the relevant stakeholders, and Geological Survey of Ireland have always been really supportive to us as a geopark. We're quite unique in that we're a cross-border geopark, so we work with 2 geological surveys, and Claire has taken up the post in, I suppose, the last 12 months or so, Claire, and it's really good to have that relationship with Geological Survey, and welcome Erin as well. It's really lovely to see you as well here today. I also just want to acknowledge the arts officers in both councils, so Katrina O'Reilly and Bryony as well, and also the work of Pádraig in the Town Hall as well, and just their role in this. And also some of our team are here today, Clarissa, Julie and Michael as well. So the Geopark really runs on a team ethos. So we're really delighted to be out and about and to see all of you here today. So I'm not going to take up too much time, but well done everyone on what is a really brilliant project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grania. I'd now like to hand you over to Councillor John Paul Feely, who is the chair of our Global Geopark Committee. John.
Jeev, good morning. You're all very welcome to Cavan Park. I can't think of a better way to get back into the working week after a long weekend as to come up here to Cavan Park. It's probably the shortest commute I'll do of the week. It's just up the road from where I live. So this place and the Geopark is very special and very personal to me and very important to our local community. So I'm delighted at the opportunity to welcome you all here. And at the outset, I want to acknowledge the Geopark staff because I know from my work as a councillor and from all of the other members of the committee from both Cavan County Council and Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, we are incredibly proud of the staff that we have and the work that they do. From Grania and Martina and the rest of the team, they are really a credit and we very much appreciate it. And it is great to have an opportunity to say that in public, again after the hiatus that we've had for the last number of years with COVID and not being able to get out and about. This is a very interesting and innovative project, and I just want to acknowledge Bea and all who worked and collaborated with her on it, that this wonderful landscape would have inspired 17 pieces of poetry is no surprise to any of us that live in it and get to enjoy it every day. The fact that 2 local schools have been involved and that people have submitted pieces of poetry from across the globe is a testament to the project and to the work that you've done, and I compliment you for that and thank you for it. It is a wonderful legacy to have this project and to add it to the Geopark. Geoparks are a difficult concept for people to understand. Many locals come and they experience the wonderful scenery, visitors likewise. They may not appreciate the significance of the giant's grave or the druid's altar or all of these other things. They're just stones to some people. Some people come and they enjoy the other elements of it. And the fact that we are putting another layer on the Geopark by having pieces of poetry specific to various sites is really a great addition to what we have, and it is only really in keeping with the Geopark philosophy that it is about protecting what is there but also harnessing it and building upon it, whether it be by improving the tourism product, as Grania has mentioned, but also by making the place more livable for those of us who are fortunate to live in this community, and making it more attractive for those who visit, whether it be from the very simple stuff, the very practical stuff, but also the really important stuff in terms of the poetry and the culture that people get to experience when they come to West Cavan and to West Fermanagh. So what you are doing here is really greatly adding to it. And I'm delighted to see that Jim Nolan is amongst those who has contributed. Jim has been a very consistent and a very important contributor to the development of the Geopark over the years. He's indisposed at the moment, as many will know, but I'm sure you'll all join with me in wishing him well. And I'm just delighted to see that he is there amongst the contributors to this. poetry is hugely important, and I'm just thinking that last Friday we had an event as a council in conjunction with Kingscourt community, the very other end of the county, and Noel Monaghan contributed 2 pieces of poetry. And I'd say, like most people, I'm not picking up a book of poetry every evening when I come home from work, but we all interact with it at different times. And he had 2 pieces of poetry, but in one of them he spoke about, well, they were both, I suppose, focusing on COVID, but he used the lines, and I suppose it did what poetry is supposed to do. It stuck in my mind over the last couple of days. He talked about taking our grief for a walk on the market square in Kingscourt, which is where the event was taking place. And I suppose it was really a reflection of the different ways that COVID has impacted upon us all. But this project is a positive element of that. You had to come up with some way of, I suppose, harnessing your creative spirit for the last couple of years, and this is a wonderful way of having done it, and it is something wonderful to have shared with the other poets and also to have shared with the wider community. So I thank you for that, and I thank you all for being here this morning. Gur Magat.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Feely. And next, our digital poetry map project and the creator of the poetry map, B. Smith. Now, as I say, I have been very fortunate enough to work with the Geopark now for a very long time. And I think I first would have encountered B back in 2010. B was one of the first cohorts who were recruited to the new Geopark Ambassador programme in Cavan. And I had come in to tutor on that particular course, and that was my very first engagement with B, and indeed with a number of the ambassadors that were on that course. And I have to say, in terms of my role in the Geopark and working with it, is working with people like B that make it an absolute honour and an absolute pleasure. From the very first day that I've met B, the enthusiasm that she has for what she does is absolutely palpable. No better person to be an ambassador of the Geopark, and to have to continue and carry that mantle for us since 2010 up until the present day is nothing short of extraordinary. And I'm delighted to have you here today and to give you this platform to really celebrate the achievement. So I'd like to invite B. Smith, our poetry map curator, to come to the podium to say a few words about the digital poetry map.
Well, today is the day. Councillor Feely, Geopark colleagues, Miss Glanville, poets and guests, you are all very welcome to Cavan Park today to launch the digital Cuilcagh Lakelands Geopark poetry map. And as you look at this relic landscape that is surrounding us, I couldn't help but recall the words from the late Thomas Luck's poem, The First Song, which is, the first song was sung after the first stone was thrown at a beast, after a spear in a man's hand brought down a pile of meat. Of course we sang of that. We hardly had the language, and we sang. We humans are makers. The root meaning of the word create translates as to form from nothing. And there is a product at the end of the process of our making. And if you walk around the Cavan Park, you will actually see the evidence of our ancestors using stone tools to make their marks on other rock. They were making art. Long before they got around to inventing agriculture, they were making art. And of course, there would also have been bards, though we have no record of their songs, and history is only written in the archaeological remains that we excavate. But poets can imagine the content of their songs and poems, the triumphs, the losses, the loves. invasions, abductions, and raids. Ancient bards were tasked with memorizing the history of their people and to transmit it to future generations. And here, in this landscape of Cuilcagh Lakelands Geopark, we can hear the echoes of their long-ago stories. Sometimes when we are faced with a crisis or completely new circumstances, like a global pandemic, we are charged to become more ambitious and more inventive, even while we are in the process of everything evolving and we are adapting to very new conditions. We innovate, just as our ancestors innovated. If you look all around this park, you will see how rocks that were left by a melting glacier later became tombs. And then you can see them in a haggard that is around the site of huts, and you can see the foundations from rocks around the huts. And then they became stone walls to shelter sheep. And then they became cabins for families to live in. A dolmen became over millennia shelter for newborn calves, and limestone was burned in kilns and became a family business. And so we continue into the digital age where geological products become the components that drive our communications. A tablet may have once been an Ark of a Covenant, but today it's now a portable cinema, an electronic book, a work tool. Everything changes, though the bards, or poets, as we call ourselves these days, continue to be the story keepers and the singers. Back in April 2020, I had been given an Artist Development Award from the Cavan Arts Office, and I was supposed to be in 5 schools in West Cavan teaching school children about poetry on Poetry Day Ireland. And of course, we were locked down. But the money was still there, and over the next 6 months, I anguished about how I could create an alternative project. And Maria McManus, who sadly cannot be here with us today, had created a digital poetry map for Poetry Day Ireland, I think back in 2018, but don't quote me on that. So I knew that poetry maps were possible. And I also knew that the Geopark had created a digital map of an oral history project, which is the Cuilcagh to Cleanish project. And I also knew that there was a lot of poetry talent all around the counties and surrounding. And so I had this idea, which I mentioned to Martina, who was really enthusiastic about the idea. And I mentioned it to Katrina O'Reilly, and she liked the idea, but she was also very practical and said that my Cavan Arts Development Award was not going to cover the scope of that idea. And then along came the Geological Survey and their GeoHeritage Fund, and they became like the magic genie that came out of the lantern that granted our wishes. So, and then we began. I knew that there were any number of established poets who would be able to contribute to the poetry map. There was Anthony J. Cronin, or Anthony J. Quinn, who had been poet in residence at the beginning of the pandemic, and he had been doing online poetry workshops, writing workshops on landscape. Seamus McCanny just lives over in Fermanagh. I knew that Maria McManus from working on the Poetry Mac. I knew that she was from Belcoo. And Noel Monaghan has written a lot of poems about the Cavan Burren. So I knew he knew the geopark well, and he lives in another section of the county close to other geopark sites. So despite lockdown, I knew that people probably, would be able to engage with the subject. And then I really wanted to include young people because schools were pretty much off limits, and Darren McNulty came on board. And now he had grown up close to many geopark sites and was very familiar. And I knew about this because he writes about them in his book, Diary of a Young Naturalist. By May, it looked as if we might be able to interact with some school children. That was part of the original plan. But the schools were actually really kind of having their own issues of contending with the different climate. But 2 schools came forward and allowed me to go and work with their kids in the outdoors. Florence Court Primary had built a bell tent on their grounds with elevated sides to allow maximum ventilation. It also allowed for maximum circulation of midges on the day. And Cuilcagh National School in Glangevlin, I had worked with previously, and the kids just walked their desks and their chairs out onto the playground, and most of them wore masks in deference to my great age. And we got on with it. And I'm just so pleased, and I wish I could have included more of their work because it's just amazing working with children. We also were able to send out an open call for submissions, and I was really surprised. We had well over 80 inquiries, and in the end we had over 50 submissions. And I had expected that I would be getting entries from Cavan and Fermanagh, of course, and the surrounding counties as well. But no, we had submissions from expats from Fermanagh living in Singapore. We engaged with people who are part of the Irish diaspora who now live in England and France and the United States. And we had many poems from different parts of Northern Ireland and the Republic. I was quite overwhelmed by the response. And all of the poems, which sadly cannot fit on the map, they all had such a heartfelt connection to the landscape. And during the pandemic, I do feel that nature was what was keeping a lot of people hanging on. I do not think that it was an accident that despite lockdown restrictions in 2020, the geopark had the largest footfall on the geopark sites of any previous year. And this was a year when international travel was pretty much at a standstill. Poetry is both an inward and an outward journey. It begins with the poet, and it gradually journeys outward from their heart and mind to the wider reading and listening public, towards them and residing in their hearts and minds. We took as our theme for this poetry map specific sites around the geopark and their geological heritage. And like the glaciers of old, the science of ancient sites met the sensibility of the modern poetic imagination. And I knew it's amazing what turns up. The exercise of reading and winnowing out those poems to a very short list was daunting and humbling. But what was very clear was that universal love of this landscape and how it has made a deeply personal connection with so many people. And you will be able to read some of those that were submitted today when we go live with the map. All of us, the poets, the funders, our Geopark colleagues, the website designers, Podrick McIntyre of Raymar Town Hall, who found the actors who give voice to the poets on the map. We are all makers of a little bit of this very long, long, long history of the past in this part of the world that we call Cuilcagh Lakelands Geopark, with this digital poetry map we launched today. Thank you all.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bea. That was fantastic. Okay, so without further ado, then I would like to invite Claire Glanville, our colleague from the Geological Survey of Ireland, to come up and say a few words, please.
Hi. First of all, Bea, I'm very happy to be referred to as the genie. But I actually wanted to start by thanking the Geopark for submitting this proposal that's led to this project, and to the poets for all of their contributions. Poets new, from the school kids, and the older, more experienced poets. So actually, I think you guys are the genies in this project. The GeoHeritage Grant Scheme is about supporting local communities, raise the awareness of our geoheritage. These are sites of geological significance or importance. They're an important part of telling the story of earth processes that have formed the landscape around us and the landscape in the geopark. For some time now, as long as people have been around, and I think Bea alluded to this, the geology has influenced our culture, our built heritage, it's our landscape, it's given us a sense of place. And I think that this project brings those intangible bits together with the tangible geology. So, you know, when I saw the proposal, I was delighted to be able to help fund it. So we've talked about this being the culmination of the project, but actually I hope that this is the beginning of a much wider raising of awareness and developing our imaginations, you know, through the written word and our literature and our culture and the geology and the rocks, because not everybody sees them as I do as a geologist, the sort of scientific side of it, but it's great to be able to bring that awareness through more intangible culture to everybody else. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire, for saying those few words. And just at this point, I really want to say on behalf of Geopark and the team, once again, to express our very sincere thanks to you, Claire. I know that this has been a very turbulent time, particularly, as Bea says, during a COVID pandemic. It certainly inspires us to think creatively and to look innovatively at how we do things. But that requires a great deal of flexibility and support from our funders to allow us to progress. So we're very, very grateful for you and all your team's support, Claire. So huge thank you for that. So now on to the main event. I suppose in a way, folks, we've been building this up now, hopefully, so that we've intrigued you just enough that we now start to look at some of those fantastic pieces of work that have been generated as part of the poetry map. As Bea actually mentioned, we had well over 50 submissions to the actual map itself. I have to say personally, I was absolutely overwhelmed with the response, overwhelmed and heartened at a time, I think, when particularly that injection of enthusiasm and that heartwarming was very much needed in our arena of work. So what we've done today is, very kindly, we have a number of the poets who have been involved in the project who have agreed to come forward and deliver their poems in person for this very special event. So in no, I suppose, particular order, but first and foremostly, if we just like to invite Seamus McInerney to come up and please give a reminiscence of his poem Cuilcagh or Cuilcagh.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Bea. Thank you all for putting this wonderful thing together. I'm not normally known as a poet. I write novels in Irish and I write history books in English, but you can't help not respond to this landscape. And Cuilcagh itself, my poem is about the mountain, and it's such a massive thing. It's hard to take it in. And so in the poem, I have imagined it as a whale. Now, I'm not the first person to imagine it as a whale. If you look at the writings of Robert Lloyd Prager, he talks about the whale-backed mountain. But I was imagining it also in the sense of a beached whale. And there's nothing more tragic than to see a whale beached. It's a sign, it's a warning sign that there's something wrong in the ecology when these majestic creatures are suffering these unnatural deaths. So in the poem, there's a certain amount of tension, there's conflict between celebrating the mountain and realising that our whole ecology is under a very great strain. I'll read it. I was asked to write a poem in Irish, but I'll read you the English translation first so that you'll be able to follow the Irish. You don't expect to see a great she-whale served up on a bed of crispy weed at the high tide line on a lonely strand between Cavan and Heaven. You fret that she might still be alive and liable to twitch her skin in death, or flick her huge tail and send us flying into one of the peaty rivers that flow from her broken sides, patterned with barnacles and weeds, and scars ever given by oil tankers, fishing nets and harpoons that mostly missed. But don't worry, she's as dead as stone can be, but alive with insects that crawl over her and birds that pick and peck their way from the battered cliff of her brow along her broad back to somewhere else far away. Dare you look into her enormous open eye, black, cold, and seeping like 1,000 bog holes brimful of secrets, or think of that mouth, her songs now silent. You'd think her massive shoulder insurmountable, slippery and wet, too close to comprehend. But look, the nylon filament that entrapped her has been stretched across the strand and up her mountain side. So together we must climb, step by step, to stand at the very top, catch our breath, and stare around in grateful wonder. For this is as close as we'll ever get to a real live mountain whale. And the Irish. Ní bhíonn tú ag súil le míl mór a eiceil, catcha suas ag barlain, leaba den nyaman bhriscarna, an trá olú idir neau agus an chawan. Tá agla ort go bhfuidir si bheith beo, is go ngetú a chracan I narinneacha an bháis, na go muinid si smach as a heribal, is go gaithid si muide stea, gceandan a helamad afneacha móna, a hillan ó na tívan a rébha, atá bracha le barneacha agus famine, agus na colm grana a fuairsaí, ó hancarí alla, angacha, agus na harpún nar bhúil I gceart í. Ach ná bíú in imní ort, tá sí chum marú le crag, agus beo leis na feithidí a rihan, agus leis na héanacha, a gioban agus a fiochan leo, ó vin bhrúte a hédain, agus har a drim fada lehan, síos go deire a herabel, na mílte as seo. Mo húlandit archas ja sa súl olwar oscailte seci, a tá dú, fuair, agus ag siilú mar atá na mílte polb forti, a tá ag corthar muil le rún, nó smuoine ar a béal, agus ar na hauráin nach glenthar a ríist. Ní híaltha go bhhéta a gúlan olmhór a grappa, nó fiú a hiiscint, nó tá sé róchongrach agus fleoch agus sleabhain. Ach féach, tá an teangach nílan a gá í, síntse trasna na trá agus suas tíomh na sléiveseci. Ní mórdúing mar sin, drapu, céim ar chéim go bar, ar nanal a ail linn, agus fécinn seartaring, go buíoch agus le hiantas. Nó ní bhéimiid có cóngrach seo a ríis, de bhíl mór sléimhe beo. Gur míle maigah.
Thank you very much, Seamus, for submitting such fantastic poems and also for reading them there so eloquently. Thank you so much. Next on the list is Maria McManus and her poem entitled Marble Arch. Now, regrettably, Maria is unable to be with us today, but her poem is actually going to be read by Jane Robinson, who has kindly agreed to do so on her behalf. So, Jane.
Hello, it's great to be here. I was flattered that Maria McManus invited me to read out her poem to you, as she can't be here today. So Maria grew up in full view of Cuilcagh Mountain, just a few miles from the Marble Arch Caves. And the first time she was in the caves, before they were showcased, she said, she experienced complete darkness. She said to me, "I love that the caves run under the border and don't recognise the border as such. The caves are their own thing. I also love how the water shaped and created the caves over thousands and thousands of years, so predating any of our modern and recent history." Marble Arch by Maria McManus. Don't think that nothing good nor beautiful can ever come from darkness, from difference, antagonists, friction, a mismatch of opposites, stone and water, water on stone. Step in to the earth's cold breath, its blind, cool intimacy, its deep workings, pearls, cathedrals, the hidden veins of its fractured history, a mystery of patience, time, alchemy.
Thank you very much, Jane, for reading that on Maria's behalf so eloquently once again as well. Next, we have Anthony J. Quinn, and Anthony's poem is entitled Devonish Island, My Family in the Vertigo of Lockdown. So, Anthony, please.
First, I'd like to thank Bea, who's the wonderfully inspirational genie of this entire project, and also Martina for bringing this project to fruition. This is a day to celebrate the power of landscape to change us emotionally and spiritually, and also the power of words to shape our sense of place in this astonishing mix of landscapes and geology. Every little corner of it calls for special admiration, and I, to my delight, chose Devonish Island. So this poem is called Devonish Island, My Family and the Vertigo of Lockdown. We left a note in the hotel guest book for the children to find and headed for the boat. We were leaving a hard-edged border for an island that lurked in the rain and drifted out of focus. I grabbed a tricorn hat and a cape, and you packed a tent because you needed a roof over your head to write. The country was emerging from lockdown and growing increasingly deranged, a desolate, distracted time, which you wrote into a book and published on your phone, while I sent out messages for help and texts to a great many people. We waited 3 months of fuzzy yellow moons and got out of our depth at the bottom of the garden. New variants, conspiracies, and vaccines emerged. Our home was a shipwreck, hitched to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. School became a corner of the bed, surrounded by candles and oil diffusers, where our daughters wrote journals in luxuriant colours and texted updates on their group chats. You kept assessing and asserting your ranking on Twitter and Facebook and fell into some very dark places. It wasn't a virus, but the phone that was making you ill. You were going mad with cabin fever and conspiracy theories and trying to take us all down, doing lengths in the rain and wallowing al fresco in search of visionary surfaces. You needed a new space to think, so we took to Loch Earn and its watery brink like the migrant monks of old. A rough crossing we had, sailing the highway of wild saints, such a combination of seasickness and mystical visions. You quoted Yeats with a dangerous gaze while I steered north, my heart in my mouth. Ahead of us lay a whale-backed island and a primeval panorama of forested shores. We found a navigable channel and ran hard into a grotto of willow and alder. St. Militia was there for the official reception party, being photographed by Time magazine. His monastery was a refuge for mothers and fathers in danger of going under, and people like him who'd given up ordinary life for art. We did the 10-day quarantine, obeyed all the restrictions, and moved in with the others. Among them were a burlesque queen with a PhD from New Orleans, a talking parrot, and a radical poet who shuffled about in carpet slippers. The evenings we spent in the shebeen by the shore, surrounded by melancholy angels. St. Militia orchestrated a cabaret and collected the rent. It seems rather bizarre, but we weren't being eccentric. The times were odd, not us. What impressed me the most about our host weren't his deadpan tales of crossing the Irish Sea in a bathtub, or his 3-day solo missions in the Atlantic, not even his incidents with sea monsters, walruses and whales, but his battles with boredom. He made isolation seem so absurdly cool, with his flinty smile and latinate drawl. He scoffed at the tameness of our pandemic and quoted from Marion Moore, "The cure for loneliness is solitude." Under his benevolent gaze, we felt safe, displaced from the world on Devonish Island, cocooned with our new friends, while the modern world floated offensively by. When night fell, I peered out at the loch, but most of it had vanished. All that remained was a telltale ripple of an approaching boat. I listened to his wave breaking on the shore and tried to define the shape of the craft and how many people were on board, while you rolled over and went back to sleep. Our children were searching for us under an effulgent night sky, where myriad constellations jostled for space amid dark-spined beasts and other strange life forms. By morning it was late by anyone's standards. Militia dove into the loch and tempted us down to its darkest cellars. The monastery dissolved, leaving only its shell, and the cells that held it together burst and decayed. The great church broke like a whale, and the monks swept through our colony with their birch scourges until our sins lay shriveled in the grasses like little birds. We were one part of a compass, planted and firm, while our children roved and circled the shore. Later they found us, half smothered in a wilderness of blackthorn, bracken and gorse. The purpose of our flight was unclear even to us, a mixture of diversion and distraction, confusion and loss. We called out our children's names and our tongues changed shape. The new sounds that emerged from our mouths flowed like water discovering its path, like laughter tumbling in the waves, where our children were swimming and waiting for us.
Thank you very, very much, Anthony. I have to say they just keep getting better and better as they go on, indeed. So thank you, Anthony, for once again for taking the time to contribute and for reading that so eloquently. Very much appreciated. Next, as you can see, was a submission by the one and only Jim Nolan, or Seamus Eotlin, known as Waterhorse. Or Uisce, about Cavan Burren Park, where else? Now, as Councillor Feely has already mentioned, regrettably, Jim is not in a position to be with us today. But there was absolutely no way that we could launch a digital poetry map without having a submission for Jim Nolan. Equally, and in a similar vein, I met Jim on the same night, in the same location, at Bare Essentials in Bumboy, when I met B back in 2010. And like all of our Geopark ambassadors and guides, Jim has been extremely warm, has been extremely kind, and is a wealth and a fountain of knowledge. And for me, as someone who is working in the Geopark, that is very much appreciated and respected, and will always be a huge inspiration for folk like us. He is the reason why we do what we do. Therefore, we felt it would be only but fitting to have a poem by Jim read out today. He's very much been the driving force for many years behind Cavan Burren Park and the evolution to what it is today and to what it will actually become in future. But not only that, he himself had obviously been instrumental in the cross-border development of the Geopark back in 2018. And it's very fitting as we look out from the podium here that you can see County Fermanagh, just on the headland there as well. So the poem that we're actually going to read today is not actually on the poetry map. It is a unique poem, a one-off specifically for today. It's linked to the legend of Tullygobbin Loch and the fairy horse, which itself is folklore that is unique to West Cavan and Sligo. So Tom Connaughty has very kindly agreed to read Jim's poem. So Tom.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much, Martina. As Councillor and yourself have spoken about Jim, and B has told me about him, how integral a man he was to the development of this park. And I don't know him, I never met him, but I do know him, and I've met him through his poem. Beautiful in Irish and in English. Waterhorse, or Ach Uisce. I'll read it in Irish first. Ach Uisce. Dinis Seamus Sharky, Shanar, Shanky, Tredi, Scale, Fi Capel War for hin, Honan Lucca, Atá Sitche, Eg Bun and Duchnig, Dugganwidge, Turka Goban, Dat Dove Vier and Gapel, Rudda Keely, Knock Juckaglat, Adder Yallow, Adder August on Skal, Jahir Kache, Eg an Cheer Drak, Dickalok More Himpel. Near Honig, an Capel Shinamach, Ach is títhe, nuair a bhíú an gealach in a thomlána, hart frá gríon stad an gevru. Am mí an slú sí in a lí, agus héan na páistí sífracha ag marciacht grim an echtomh, go can na tíre. Agus ag léim, haar slívas haar áhan, ach fill siad rih braca le, am a héu an luc sí faoi halamh, agus an capal arás I nó an isce an Dubh Hill. Ba leabhar. Ach, tiglad rianta ura a eáil fós, de crúb a capalacha, granta in salab, bhruach an Dubhlacha. Agus má éistan tú go géir, cliní tú setrach, nó scig gair a chapal, ag brisisiú na don, agus an gríon ag airí, madjin dúrachta. Inis ihe lán gealaí, hí scail gubh holí na guban. Water horse. He lived beneath the waters of Tuilcagh Loch, according to the old Shanquay, the herdsman Jemmy Sharkey. A majestic black steed hidden in the deep dark lake, camouflaged by the eternal shadow cast by the brooding hill above. He only came out at night, and then only if there was a full moon, round about the winter sunstop. That's when the fairies would be about, and the elfin children used to ride him from Malin to Mizzen, over rivers and mountains. But it would always return before daybreak, when the children would all go back underground and the horse would re-enter the deep depths of the dark loch. A tall tale if ever you heard one. But were those not fresh horse hoof tracks I saw, going only one way, in the mire at the water's edge? And that sounded strangely like a derisive horse whinny, almost an equine laugh, I heard breaking the waters as the rising sun suddenly appeared over Tuilcagh Hill. After I had stumbled here, desperately searching for something to believe in, the morning before last Christmas Eve.
Thank you very much for doing that, Tom. Very much appreciated, and hoping and sure when Jim watches this back, I'm sure he'll be delighted with that rendition of both his poems there. Next, we move on to Brí Cahill, and her contribution to the poetry map and her poem entitled Turbot Island and Turbot.
Thanks, Martina, and my thanks also to B and everybody involved with the Cuilcagh Lakelands Geopark poetry mapping project. This poem originated from a walk I took on Turbot Island after we came out of one of the many lockdowns. Turbot Island on Tarbert. Sunshine streams through latticed leaves. Vibrant green paints a rustic scene on tranquil Turbot Isle, where now I stroll the winding wooded paths. Hard to envision millennia past, when ice held it fast in glacial grip, and woolly mammoths dug with giant tusks, dredging sedges for elephant tummies. Might of ice held sway, till shift in earth's tilt warmed frigid land, and meltwater began to mould moraine, create drumlin and lake, make meandering Erin to swell and surge, bearing forefathers here with hunting spear. Breffni, their kingdom through centuries grew, forest and farm thriving, river trade too. When rival clans for supremacy clashed, O'Rourke and O'Reilly hostility was Anglo-Norman opportunity. De Lacy, Amott and Bailey raised, claiming mastery of Gaelic Breffni. But brief was his reign along River Erne. His settlement town of Tarbert would be, in restored O'Reilly territory. In 17th century planters came and gave to Bale Tarbert its Anglo name, a garrisoned fortress and central square, Anglican church, spire high on horizon. Much grandeur still in this once county town, the Erne at its heart, Turbot Isle the soul, where ghosts of ancestors close by us roam.
Excellent, Breed. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for taking the time to come today to read that to us all. It was fantastic. Next, we head back to Tom, but this time with his own creation entitled Backbone, Cavan Byrne.
Just gives me a chance to say thank you very much to Bea. I've been involved in many projects in education and poetry over the years with Poetry Ireland, and I know that it's difficult enough to run them in ordinary times, but in such difficult times, to yourself, Martina, geological people, the county council, all of these things only take place because of huge work and huge dedication. And as I was saying about Jim Nolan, people like yourselves who are completely dedicated, almost mad you would think at times, because there seems to be no end or no point in continuing. But we do it for strange reasons. And when I started writing poetry, it started in Ballyhaise School as a kid. I remember in third class. I remember opening to the emotions of things. And one of them was when Cuilcagh and Ferdia were fighting. I thought, geez, they can't kill each other. They can't do that. And yet we hear these stories, and we live in a time where Ukraine has, and our own country here, this was a divided land. And a lot of violence and a lot of things, and we open up to it. And there are politicians, and they do great things, and people do great things. But poetry and art, as Bea was talking, is here long before any of that kind of talk, too much talk maybe. And maybe the poems as well too can be too long. But one of the things that I remember as a kid in Ballyhaise School was the map of Cavan, hand-drawn by a teacher, and on the very tip of it were places I hadn't been to before, and that included West Cavan, because when you were growing up, as I did in the 60s, you went through West Cavan when you were going to Bundoran. But there was a beautiful map, hand-drawn map, and there was the backbone, like a fish backbone that marked the Cuilcagh Mountains. And in that, close to that, was the place where the Shannon started. And you think, I live in a county where the longest river in Ireland starts. I wrote this poem, Byrne, because landscape is obviously important to us all. And as a poet, you can't help but be influenced, if you come from Cavan, in terms of being a watery poet. There's a lot of water around. It started for me, this poem, Backbone, I was in an MRI scan. So I was in the geological survey of myself. And when you talk, Claire, about science and that science and art and poetry, they do meet all of the time, and I've been involved in projects with that, and they meet beautifully here. And I was reading some of your, sort of wonderful scientific excursions through the landscape, and it's poetic in itself. Even the words themselves are poetic, like Clint and Grike. They're beautiful, beautiful words. Anyway, I was in the MRI scan, and all I knew was that I was heading into a cave, and you get that sense of claustrophobia when you're going in there. And the man in the tower said to me, "Do you want to hear some music?" And I said, "Yeah, please." And I was going slowly in, and he said, "What kind of music do you want?" And I said, "Anything." So I think Lyric FM was playing, but what actually came on was Elgar's Sea Pictures, right? I'm not an authority on classical music, but Sea Pictures, and the particular one from Sea Pictures was Where Corals Lie. And I was thinking, here I am, backbone. If I was an animal, I'd disintegrate into the landscape, and my backbone would be the backbone of the land, and all of that sort of stuff. So that sent me off on a tangent. And it reminded me also too of Seamus Heaney's. He wrote a collection called Seeing Things, And in that collection there is a section called Squarings. And from section 32 of Squarings, there's a line in it which gave me the lead in to the poem, which when you're out in landscape like this, you know what I mean, it's raw. But that's the beautiful, we need to meet our raw selves. And it opens with the line from Heaney, "It steadies me to tell these things." It's in 4 short parts. 1. More than a metaphor for a Burren Park, these stony sea pictures of my backbone, MRI cave paintings, where corals lie, more than a soundtrack playing in my ears to allay the fears of hemmed-in, strafing magnets, pummeling protons, knocking me off frequency. 2. On a Gulf Stream, an organised band of weather is coming in off the Atlantic, precipitation peppering the land, raining down with a sculptor's hand, hammer and chisel, pelt, peel and pull. Stone gives way to the siege, slow dissolving time. Osteoporosis of limestone yields to the weight of water, clint and grike paving the way, stepping stones of the soul. The wind out here would rattle you if you were on your own, and yet being on your own and being alone and listening to the delirium of air is all there is to settle you. 3. Ishke Fehalav, fisher of grike and the bottleneck glug of gargoyle gargling water, runnels of rain, anterograde flow through sphincters of light, hidden rivers coursing in veins and arteries under the skin. Bone and stone are only skin deep, kin deep, exfoliating, dissolving, absolving, shedding light on this border, where drum lines are written, beaten out the bardo, liminal lines between what's seen above, hidden below. 4. The burren sings to where corals lie, inwards and downwards, symphony of stone, ad-lib of flood waters in the dark cave, making it hard to say who's calling. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom. Obviously, it's hugely unfortunate that your health took a turn, that you needed such an MRI scan, but I have to say, on a very selfish vein and from a poetry map project, we're delighted that it inspired you in such a way to produce such a fantastic piece. So thank you. Okay, and last, but by no means least, we're back this time to Jane Robinson, but once again, similar to Tom, a creation of her own making this time, entitled Another Era, Another Place, Loch Uther.
Well, thank you all for this wonderful project, and Martina Geological Survey and all the poets. It's such a lovely event, and thanks for the opportunity to read my poem here, and also for the inspiration to write it. So I spent most of lockdown working on a sequence about Bikini Atoll and the things that happened there, and I was wondering how to link it back to Ireland. And then when I engaged with this inspiring prompt, to write a poem for the Geopark poetry map, I found the link. So it's amazing, really, to think that the limestone rocks of Cavan were formed millions of years ago in a shallow tropical sea. Another era, another place. I run my thumb across a boulder, shouldering out of Loch Uther, nubbed with little crinoid ossicles, fragmented from sea lily stalks. Not flowers, but animals that trawled their 5, 10, 30 pinnules through warm and shallow waters back when Ireland was a coral reef. Now in the Marshall Islands, present-day Pacific Ocean, living crinoids pulse and ripple in the currents, feathered arms, striped and dappled, Yellow, maroon, white, golden, orange, pinkish, purple, green and green, still alive and breeding well. In limestone traces, crinoid heads nod on their articulated stems, exotic sea flowers trapped in silver tone on time's slow film. Gur míle maith agaibh.
Thank you very, very much, Jane, for that poem, and also thank you for travelling such a distance, for all the way from Dublin this morning to be with us today. So thank you very much. As you can see, folks, that takes us to the end of the readings. You can see that we've given you a flavour of the submissions as part of the poetry map, and I can honestly say it was one of the most difficult days of my life to sit back and have to go through and assess them with B. The standard is extraordinarily high, and from my own personal perspective, so heartwarming and encouraging to see that so many can take inspiration and creativity from the fantastic geopark that I have the pleasure to call my office, the place where we can live, work and play. So thank you all once again for coming along this morning. Hopefully that has now suitably whetted your appetite to be able to, well, in more than one way, in terms of going on. The link, as you know, for today's recording will be live and will be circulated, apologies, after today's event. So I will circulate that along with the link to the actual digital poetry map, which has gone live today in partnership, and just supposed to acknowledge the day that is also UNESCO World Poetry Day as well. So certainly that will all be circulated. Once again, just before we finish, just to once again reiterate my thanks, my own personal thanks, and indeed thanks on behalf of the Geopark, as Gráinne has just done, to a number of folk here. So to Councillor Fegley, as the chair of our current Geopark committee, obviously we're delighted that you could take the time out of what I know was a very busy schedule for us here today. But as Gráinne has mentioned, we have been through a period of significant transition and change, and we're delighted to have such leadership and guidance from our Geopark committee as we continue to evolve and adopt a different strategic and operational direction as we move forward. Our thanks to Claire and her team again, as we said, in the Geoheritage section of the Geological Survey. This is one of hopefully the start of a number of projects where we will continue to work with each other in the future, and very much look forward to doing so. We've mentioned Catriona O'Reilly and Padraig McIntyre, and once again we cannot thank them enough for their effort and support to be, and indeed to myself, throughout the project, and their counterpart in Fermanagh Noma, Bryony May, as well. James Bamford from North Mapping Service is the gentleman that we all have to thank for the creation of the actual poetry map itself, and to all the schools as well who engaged. But obviously I want to say a personal thanks to you all for taking the time to be here today, to have engaged with the project. It simply wouldn't have been possible without you all. And I just want to finish by reading a small part that it is sort of our aim and our mission in the new Geopark as we move forward. So we're here basically to nurture and protect the unique heritage of our landscapes, to ensure that our places can restore and revitalise those that live, work and visit, and enable connections to be made between people, heritage and nature. And I think today we've demonstrated how we can do that in many innovative and creative ways, and I personally very much look forward to working with you all to continue to do that in the future.